Hello and welcome to the second lesson of the Introduction to Design. Thank you for those who liked this video, who subscribed and who stuck around. I am rewarding you with the second lesson, the history of graphic design. We're going to look back through how it all started and all the different eras or eras, however you pronounce it, of design. Now we're going to start right at the very beginning. Because of course originally there was barely any graphic design to speak of. There were handwritten signs and not much else. If you wanted to replicate something, some piece of art, you had to copy it line by line, hand by hand, and of course that was very laborious. But something happened when the printing press came on the scene. People could see that things could be replicated at scale as long as you had a method for doing so. And the method was lithography. Lithography takes the elements of a picture, of a graphic, breaks it down into the different colors that make up the image, and then oil is used to separate the ink from where they don't want it to where they do want it, and the ink is applied to those shapes that you want to have color on. Those are applied to the paper, and of course the oil means it doesn't run into different places, and then when you run different colors through at different times, you can compose up a graphic that is composed of different colors, and then you can reproduce it at scale. So this allowed the initial kind of art and design prints to be created, and it looked something like this. So the one on the left here is a good example of the very early lithography designs that were out there. Very ornate, kind of represented the Victorian era for me. With all its wrought iron work, Isabel Kingdom Brunel, and that kind of thing. Now, very, as you can see, lots of detail in there, lots of ornate, and interesting the colors as well. Can you see how many colors are in there? I think there's three. So there's the black that makes up the grays as well. Then there's the red, which is used for the typography and the carriages and certain elements of the train. And then there's a yellow color, but there's nothing else. I don't believe there's any blue in there. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm wrong. But it's been composed of those three colors, so it's not a full color palette. Because of course that would have cost a lot more money to do it in full colors, so they didn't do that. Now that ornate, sort of very rigid, let's say engineered feel gave way to Art Nouveau, or new art, which kind of rebelled against that. And you're going to see this theme a lot running through the different eras that I'm going to talk about, because art is a conversation, right? It's a conversation. You are reacting to somebody else's design, and either you adopt it and you do what they're doing, or you do something completely different. And of course there's always an element of people who just like, no, I don't want to do that anymore, let's do this instead. And it starts off a very new movement, and that's what's happened here. We've gone from that rigid sort of ornate look to flowing hand-drawn lines, a lot of simplicity, a lot more composition there, and very beautifully hand-drawn, seemingly hand-drawn elements. Well, probably worth hand-drawn to start with. And then we went from that to this very unique style called Wiener Werkstrasse. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm sorry if I haven't. Where you've got very strong geometric features, you've got repeating patterns, some very iconic typography starting to come out, and again very striking colors. And that movement obviously had a massive inspiration and many things, but didn't last for a terribly large amount of time, because not even 10 years later the Bauhaus movement came out, and that took those repeating patterns, that complexity, and broke it down into this minimalistic, simplistic sort of design, where you've got these very fundamental elements. Do you see even the typography has been broken down? Either A is just a triangle with a bit missing. It's very, very simplistic, but a lot of attention is given to the form and the different interplay of graphic design principles in there, repetition and those kind of things. So that's obviously a very interesting. It's my favourite one, Bauhaus. It's very amazing. I really love the art and the posters from this era. I think it's just really good, really nice sort of design to look at. Very appealing indeed. Now the next one that we moved on to was very, very different indeed. A whole new era of brand identity. Now this is where things went from not just advertising a product, the very basic, I need to sell this. This new movement came from the idea that brands wanted people to feel something about them, right? They didn't want to just sell a product. They wanted people to identify with them, and that's came out in these logo designs that were by, I've forgotten his name. I didn't include it here because I thought I'll remember that, but of course I have forgotten. Look him up because he's a very iconic designer. All you have to do is search IBM logo designer or American Express logo designer, and you'll find the person who's responsible for these iconic designs. And doesn't it, like, if IBM ever changed their logo, I'm sure there'll be an uproar, because this logo just epitomizes IBM. And it creates a feeling, doesn't it? Whether that's good or bad is arguable, right? But it is the brand. It is IBM, and he did that for a lot of different things. And as you see, it's actually part of graphic design today. You can't separate the two. Very, very big shift there, wasn't there? Okay, what happened next? Well, somebody took it apart, and we get people like Andy Warhol, sort of balking against that corporate sort of established rule system, and did crazy things like breaking down Marilyn Monroe's face into these 3 different images. So he, obviously this was the era of punk, and people were rebelling against the order and structure that had been established, and so therefore the art is a reflection of that postmodernism. It's gone away from that modernism sort of influence to its own thing. Very, very separate and very unique style. Love it or hate it, it's very, very striking, isn't it? And then shortly after that, computer interfaces became so prominent and so important. Like, just think about this image here that we've got. How does anybody know what to do with this before there's any established rules? Like when Xerox PARC and Apple started building the first user interfaces, and then shortly after that Microsoft. You know, like, we all know what these different tools are, right? We all know what that means. You've got to type. That means select. You know this means fill, right? But how do you know it? How? Well, it's because certain people thought about how these interactions could be represented on a screen. That to me is amazing, right? How could these things like menus, things like this button here, how do you know what that square does, or that it does anything at all? Well, you and I both know that it'll close the window, but how do you know it? It's amazing how these kind of things originated, and a lot of thought and care and attention went into those kinds of details in interfaces. Big shout out to Clarice the dog cow, the unofficial mascot of Apple there. Right, next came deconstructivism. Again, somebody takes all of that order and structure and just destroys it. So deconstructivism, not the corporate identity, but people like David Carson, he really just took away that structure but gave us some very intense expression, and I like deconstructivism for that, because it is very expressive. You know, you can almost tell what David Carson is like as a person by looking at this piece of art, can't you? Right? He's communicated a huge amount by what he's written there, by what he's done. You know, it's just quite epic. Some of it is very brash and unpleasant and offensive, but it does communicate very striking in a very striking manner. Right, then the internet happened, And we get things like, so design choices were very limited to begin with, right? You had text that was basically one of 6 fonts, and you had 256 colors, and that was it. And layout was very limited as well. So what you had was some text and mostly images. Now you could have to be very careful with images, because of course the more images and the bigger they were, then the longer it would take to get to the other end. And also people's monitors were very small, so you were very limited in the space that you had. For instance, Apple, that banner, welcome to Apple, that's not text, that's pure image, the whole thing. There's no rounded corners. Some of the most creative things was the Space Jam website and the You've Got Mail film website, which has sadly been taken down. I'm very, very miffed about that. But that Space Jam website is very, very creative. And you can see how this influenced print design as well, because they wanted to align a bit with that and align brands and align ideas. Then came Flash. Flash turned the web into this really, really unusual landscape. Because Flash is a runtime and it was owned by one company, there was a lot of people that didn't like it. But it didn't mean you get loads of animated experiences. You could have bigger images. You could have all kinds of things. And you see how there's no standardization here. Like, where's the navigation on this site? I don't even know. It might be here. All work. Yeah, that portal, that looks like the navigation. This navigation is across the top. But you find a lot of experimentation in the layouts and the usability of websites, because there was no standard. People just did what they wanted. Nobody knew how to use a website, so it was just a free-for-all. And then Apple came along and totally destroyed that, and got rid of Flash altogether. But it did mean that what happened was people went back to HTML, back to the fundamental building blocks of the web, and assessed the usability of it. What do I mean by usability? Well, if you get in a car and the steering wheel is at the back, or the brake pedal and the acceleration pedal are swapped around, or the handbrake isn't where you're used to, what do you think? If all of those things were out of whack and not in the places that you expected them to be, you'd probably walk away from that car thinking, I can't drive this thing, right? And it's the same with websites. For example, what happens if I click on this logo? You and I both know it takes us to the home page, right? So, and every site has got a navigation across the top now, usually with a search button, and if it's an e-commerce site, with a cart. You can tell these things have become standardized, and I think that's a big plus for the web. It means that people know what to expect, and therefore they can use any website. It does mean, however, that things have become very standardized, and therefore you get a lot of websites that look identical, and this is a bad thing. Websites should be individual and look different, and I wonder if the next era that we're going to have is going to reject some of that. See, the thing is, you can't replace the usability standards that have been established, but there must be a way to make it more creative or expressive in some way or another. Let's wait and see. There is a movement on the web about that. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's actually quite small. Brutalism. It's called Brutalism. Web design brutalism. If you search for that, you'll find it. But it's not really taken off, I would say. It's limited, and the impact has therefore been limited. So that's it. This is the modern era. This is where we are. And you'll see graphics and print and magazines are all aligned to this kind of style now. So I wonder what's next. Won't it be interesting to see? So that's the end of the lesson. We've gone right from the first lithographic prints all the way through to today. And hasn't it been a journey? Hasn't there been some very interesting design styles that you've seen? No doubt there's been some ones that you have recognized, or if you I didn't know that had a name kind of thing. And that's why I want you to do some homework. I want you to catalogue your collection. What have you got in your collection so far? Have you got a lot? Have you got just a couple of things? Are they of one particular movement or style or era, or are they different? That would be interesting to find out, wouldn't it? See if you can match them up. See if you can identify which movements the different pieces of art belong to. And I hope that's an education for you. Thanks ever so much for coming along to the second lesson. And I haven't decided what we're going to look at next, so I'm just going to leave it there and yeah, see you in the next one.